Okay, so I have the original animation pulled up here, so we can go frame by frame as a sort of cool little movement study, just in general to help you, if not for this animation, then at least for your future animation projects that could require cool, complex movement. So obviously, the complex movement and anatomy of a human being isn't exactly going to be the exact same as this little texture guy here, but hopefully you can learn some principles of movement. It's not really relevant, but I find it really interesting how instead of the character jumping into frame, you have it to where the camera pans to the left to meet the camera, and you can tell through the grid line in the stage back here, the pane, you could really tell that if there was a grid, but that's not really relevant. So starting off here, we have the character jumping, which is great. This is pretty similar to movement that you'd see before a backflip, or even a front flip, is that characters do a quick little hop before the main jump. So that's really similar to this. You can see a sort of gradual movement down, which is good. This is a pretty quick hop, but then this frame, it slows down, which is good, and then it explodes up. But I think it's a little too explosive here. So you have the frame here. This is where he's starting to push up, and then it's already fully extended, whereas the waistline doesn't really change much is the issue here. So you can see the knees are extended here, and you can see the waistline along the background line right there, and then it's pretty similar there, just with the pelvis slightly above, I suppose. So I feel like that should be higher. Along with the body's bend is a little peculiar for the way this movement is right there. That's not really as important. So here, very important is this hand movement. You can see this hand sort of leads the rest of the body along with the jump. And so whereas this hand goes up, this hand needs to tuck inwards to the body in order to get the twist momentum in the first place, because otherwise you'd just be jumping straight up and down. So you can see, you actually do that pretty well, very nicely. You have this arm slinging around, which makes this body open upwards towards the sky, as well as this arm going towards the chest, which allows the momentum to carry over and allows the spin to continue fast. You can actually tell through the shoulders exactly the movement. So by this point, the arm is still up, whereas the rest of the body is sort of, it's trying to follow through, but it's not really having anywhere to follow through because the arm is still up rather than continuing to lead the way. So the body caught up to where the arm is supposed to be leading it towards. And then here, that really is emphasized to where, at this point, the body is leading the arm. The body turned, and then the arm turned in this horizontal direction. And that continues throughout sort of the rest of the animation. At this point, it's just aimed down. Here is really interesting. You have the elbow sort of driving its way to continue leading the body once again in this direction. And then the arm slings around after the elbow, the top of the arm. So that really follows through. You have it land. So going back through it, that was just that one arm. I'll go through all of it. So you have two little loops here. Here's the first loop. And then rather than landing, the character does that second loop. So this movement right here is loop number 2. Even though that's not necessarily how that works, but it's how I'm breaking it down. So you got the movement in 2 parts. Here's part 1, and then you can have it land right there, have the feet go straight down. They would land backwards, admittedly, unless they did another little twist. And then boom, that right there. That's extra movement to land in this forward direction now. Again, this arm slinging around, this arm is close to the chest so that it allows for the spin. The only problem is that obviously with the halo in the hand, the arm would be slightly out. But you would want this hand as close as possible in order to really emphasize the movement. And then it would sort of switch here to where when this arm drives back, this arm would want to extend outward. But that doesn't happen, as you can see. Rather than extending outward, it moves from in front of the chest. See how the arm is in front of the chest here, right in front of the torso. It instead moves down to the right hip. The right arm moves down to the right hip on the turn. And then following that, it keeps going down even farther below before eventually, this is a bad momentum where the person is out of control. And rather than continuing to maintain and preserve their momentum, they sort of have their momentum work against them and the G-force is against them rather than helping the halo move. So here they're having used their physical strength. And then this is slightly peculiar, but they drop the halo, it looks like, and then follow through with their hand to follow the halo down. So just looking at the halo now itself, there's where the character throws it for you. They're still in the air here, I think you should have one leg land before they throw it, so they would still hold it in their hand at this point. And then I don't think they should drop it necessarily, but just following through it. You really did stick with the movement idea of the frisbee, which I'm really happy about. This is exactly how a frisbee would drop, assuming you did throw it in this sort of professional style. It would drop, swoop towards the ground, and then continue forwards before doing the slight little curve upwards and following that path now. The only difference between how it would curve here in this animation versus reality, this is perfect. This entire thing of the frisbee animation would be perfect, except right here is where it deviates from this animation to reality. Following the path you have, it swoops down, and then it follows its new path. So you can see it's curved to our right, to the character's left. So it's going to continue on in this direction, continue swooping at this curved angle, almost like a circular pattern. But it does too much so. So keep in mind, aside from the angle, it swoops up and then slowly glides back down. So what we should have here, based on this movement, is it goes from here. It should continue on either in this direction where my mouse is going, or it should continue on even further at a steeper angle, such as like this. But that's like as steep as it goes. Really, it would probably end up going straight in reality. It would even out. But instead what it does is instead of going down, it sort of curves back up, which is exactly what I wanted you to do because I wanted it to go fully in the frame exactly as you have it. So that's perfect on that part. The only issue with this is, with this movement in particular, it wouldn't make physical sense. But it doesn't really matter because it's a magical system anyways, not a frisbee. So you don't necessarily have to change it. Just letting you know about the certain movement of how that works in reality. Because really what it is in order to have this push, this is the frame where it happens. Right there. You would have to have movement. You would have to have a push off of this direction, and there's nothing naturally pushing it. It requires a strength, such as a human foot would do this to a body, push off the ground in this direction, in order for the body to change movement towards this direction. So here you'd have, assuming this halo was a person, you'd have this foot right now connecting here, and then pushing with their leg this direction, in order for the person to now switch going towards this direction, or even really up, so it's like this direction. So here's what I mean by the baseball pitch. So following the halo, this is good, but it would switch as I mentioned, and it does right there. So at this point, you're going to sort of you'll see baseball players do this. They'll put their hand, assume instead of a halo, this is a baseball, they'll put it behind their back, sort of above their butt. And this allows them to get the full range of motion, sort of, for the dynamic movement. So it should be back here right now, around here. Instead it's by its hip. And then here, this is actually the correct arm movement pose, at least the correct pose for where the arm would be at this point. It'd go from behind the back to a movement such as this, sort of slinking backwards to sort of create the bow and arrow effect. And then here, this is good. So this arm is starting to sling around. As I mentioned, it's driving its elbow. So this is where the big deviation is you can really look at the shoulders. The shoulders right now are at this angle, right parallel with this arm and this arm. So what should be happening is, right now, it should be parallel to the camera. So instead of parallel in this direction, it's parallel on like the 3D axis towards us and towards him. So basically if it'd be a line, we would only see the line going straight towards him and straight towards us. What this means is that they're rotating their shoulders, which allows this arm to sort of slink forward, force its way forward. And this shoulder, yeah, that's pretty good. You just want to really emphasize that movement. So it's like a baseball pitch. Right now, this shoulder is back here. It should be even further back. And that means this arm should be way further back because it should be sort of parallel. So this should basically be behind its head right now. And once it lands, that's when you want to really open up and extend. So instead of this 90-degree angle, you want it at a very big straight line, sort of with a bend at the elbow just slightly. It should be something more like that. And then with that, you can really throw it hard in that direction. Here, it's sort of just, it stays curved at this 90-degree angle of this arm this entire time, which doesn't allow the momentum to really work in the way that it's intended to with the spin. Because here, if they open up, they're going over. They're doing a huge U arch, and that's really forcing the big dynamic momentum that I'm looking for with that. Finally, we're going to be looking at the feet now. This will probably be a lot quicker. So again, with the curves of the arm, the body's turning. The knees specifically are going to go towards the sky, and the legs are going to be bent, which is going to allow the barrel momentum, sort of barrel spin. And it's going to stay like this until this point where the hips, you also want to notice the hips, where the hips are compared to the shoulders as well. So the hips are sort of opening up here. And this means you want to sort of push the further leg through and also pull the closer leg inwards, which would create that very momentum. But instead, it's sort of this tuck and roll maneuver here, where it doesn't seem like the actual character model changes from the waist down here. It looks like it's just flipped slightly horizontally. This knee right here would be driving forwards, which would continue the spin to allow for the second part of the spin to physically, anatomically make sense. Whereas this leg would be sort of straight and it'd be sort of receding in, recoiling. So yeah, this leg would be completely kicked through. And this leg would be, at this point, this foot would be going towards the butt sort of to continue emphasizing the movement. And then here, this leg would have kicked through, which would allow the spin in order for this leg to now, even though it's here, it would go down. So this leg would be pushing its way downwards to finish and land. But instead what's happening is this leg is below this leg right now. This leg should be extended and down. So even though the hips, it'd be not necessarily like this, but extended and down. So it'd be sort of in a slight bend at the knee, as I mentioned with the slight bend of the elbow for the baseball pitch earlier. And then this leg, if that's doing that, this leg's just going to be out. Right about here, this leg would land. It'd be straight down on the ground, and it would be sturdy, solid as a rock, immobile. It would not be moving for the basically rest of the animation. It'd be pivoted, anchored to the ground, whereas this leg would be up. And again, it'd be sort of relative to this arm. So if we go back here, this arm is coming over. That means this leg is forcing its way down. This is the hardest sort of movement of the animation because it goes the fastest sort of. It's the biggest momentum, the thing that really drives and impacts the whole swing movement. It's a big swing. So what you want to do here, this leg's going to be driving down, whereas this leg, with the hip, it's going to be rotating, turning. That means you get a big kick and the big swing. So rather than falling, it's sort of falling right now, it'd be going up and over and around, all the way. So then it would land, and around this point is where you would throw. So this arm would be going up and over, whereas this leg would be going down and under and to the side, whereas this leg would be stuck in place. This arm, again, throwing. This leg would be continuing to go. It'd be following through with the movement. So just going over that one more time. So this leg is going in that sort of movement, big swing, huge swing. Whereas at the same exact time, this arm, the right arm, is going in this movement. So it's sort of almost following the leg's movement. So that leg be going that way, this arm would be going around. It's a huge circle, huge circle. And then it would end this way. Again, this leg would be cemented down. This leg would be continuing to go just to continue preserving the momentum, having the character follow through. The only other thing is because this leg, the left leg for them, the right leg for us, because it's anchored in place, the character doesn't necessarily fall like this, because with the momentum of this leg sweeping this way, it'd be sweeping back up again, which would force momentum up, which would fight against gravity, along with this leg being anchored, which means it wouldn't really bend as easily. So it'd be land, a little bit of weight, but really the momentum is sideways rather than down, pretty much the whole way, because of the way that the shoulders and upper body sort of rotates around the body, around the lower torso especially, the waist. So this leg would be going this way, this leg would still be cemented in place, and this arm would continue to wrap around the body. And this elbow would be driving through the other direction, so it'd be going around the body once again. But at that point, this leg would be stopping any further swing from occurring, so the movement would just sort of stop right there. So the only other thing is, in this animation, the character would be standing up, as mentioned, with the swing and the only slight bend in the elbow. They would not sink to this degree. There they land. They shouldn't really go much lower than this, maybe that low, and then back up. So it'd be like down, back up. Sort of something like that. Maybe not that high, but you get the general idea. So rather than sinking way down here, this is sort of like a superhero pose But I think I did tell you the superhero pose, but I was thinking of a different movement entirely from this. I'm just speaking on this movement in particular, not necessarily how I want it, but how this movement would happen, assuming this is how you're animating it in real life. So they sink here, and then they have to sort of forcibly push themselves with their own strength back up rather than using momentum. So rather than focusing on the halo, focus on the person. How they have to sort of stand up. They're sort of in a kneeling position. And they could just stay there for the rest of the animation. But rather, they have to, instead of continuing the movement, they're sort of starting a new movement, ending the previous movement, and starting this new movement where they sort of forcibly stand their way up using strength rather than their movement from the previous momentum. So that's the animation. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Let's see how long this is. Oh gosh, 20 minutes. Okay, don't hate me.
False Perfections, returning next year.